Hello, welcome back to the Antioch Report. My name is Phil, and in today's video I'm adding a mercenary to the ranks of the Black Grail with a Sin Eater, a hulking, mallet pulping former human from the depths of hell. Let's get into it. Most of the Sin Eater is armor, a huge hammer, so after the usual army painter matte black primer, I wanted to build up a base and several layers of highlights with different silvers to give the armor some variation. I started off with scale 75 metal and alchemy black metal, then 50/50 paint to Vallejo airbrush thinner through the airbrush at 25 psi. Black metal is a deeper, rich silver that will provide a great base to build up some light tones from. Leaving it in the shadows creates a more natural shadow like you would get with some non-metallic colours. The first highlight is scale 75 metal and alchemy thrash metal, again thinned 50/50 with thinner and through the airbrush at 25 psi. Thrash metal has a more flat and brushed look to it, which will show up well under the weathering, as I didn't want the final outcome to look too shiny, but a more dull utilitarian look which lends itself nicely to the setting. Final highlight on the metal is scale 75 metal and alchemy heavy metal. This was thinned again 50/50 and through the airbrush at 25 psi. This went over a smaller area than the thrash metal and just brought some of those leading edges up while still maintaining the flatter look I was after. With the silver on the armour done, so was the airbrush, as I moved on to tackle the rest of the mini. First up was the cloak. I wanted to keep it the same theme as the rest of the Black Grail warband, despite it being a glory mercenary, so if it did get filled in a game, then it would fit in. I start the blue the same way I did the thralls and the corpse guard, with scale 75 Caspian blue, then 50/50 paint to water on my wet palette and applied all over the cloth. With the base layer dried, it's onto the first highlight, which is a 50/50 mix of Caspian blue and Citadel Fenrisian grey air, which is again thinned 50/50 with water on my wet palette. I used the highlight all over the larger folds in the cloth, making sure to leave the pure Caspian blue in the shadows and recesses, as unlike the others there would be no Dragunov Nightshade wash this time. The reason for the lack of a wash is the weathering later on would be less subtle on larger cloth like this. I wanted to make sure it would pop more underneath the unifying washes and the weathering. After the mix, the final highlight was pure Fenrisian grey, which went over a smaller area of the larger folds and raised areas of the cloak. I quite like the Fenrisian grey, as it's a more desaturated pale blue that blends well with the Caspian, rather than some of the brighter blues like Vallejo wolf grey. With the blue finished, I turned my attention to the flesh work. The Sin Eater carries a corpse around on its back as a reminder of its insatiable gluttony, so to begin that rotted look I start off with Vallejo model colour deck tan, as I've done throughout the rest of the warband. This was thinned 50/50 paint to water and was applied all over the flesh, being careful not to get any on the freshly finished blue cloth. The deck tan was then applied all over the skulls that adorn the Sin Eater. Acting as a base was some 2 thin coats Vampire Fang bone colour, both in 50/50 paint to water on the wet palette. With the Vampire Fang dried, I used some neat Citadel contrast skeleton horde over the skulls to blend the layers together, before highlighting again with the Vampire Fang, but this time thin 25/75 paint to water in a little bit more of a glazed highlight. Turning my attention back to the flesh, it got a highlight coat of deck tan and Vallejo game colour dead flesh, mixed 50/50 with each other, then 50/50 with water, which then applied over the flatter and upper areas of the flesh, as well as the guts and cuts. I also used some Vallejo Game Air Leather Brown, then 50/50 paint to water to pick out the ropes and belts holding the skulls and corpse of the Sin Eater. The next step for the corpse was the unifying wash, using Villainy Inks Carrion Crimson Enamel Wash. You know by now how much I love using the Carrion to stain the flesh of my Black Grail, and after thinning it 25/75 Enamel to White Spirit, this went all over the outer areas before moving on to a 50/50 mix for a deeper tone to the guts and cuts. With the enamel dry, I could start to build up the highlights on the flesh tone. I started off with a 50/50 mix of deck tan and scale 75 pale skin, then 50/50 paint to water over the raised areas, and then a pure pale skin pass on small areas. The guts and cuts got some additional attention, with some highlights of dead flesh, then some Citadel technical blood for the blood god to stain the surrounding areas and deeper recesses. With the vast majority of the work now done, it's on to my favourite step, and as you know by now, that means the AK streak and grind comes out. This went all over the armour and the cloth while avoiding the corpse and the skulls. After letting it dry for 15 minutes, I came back in with the white spirit and cotton buds to remove all the excess grime and leave a thin filter over most of it, and some heavy deposits in some desired recesses and areas of dirt would naturally cling to. 30 down rust, thin 60 to 40 water to effect, then got applied over the armour and the hammer. I used a slightly more watery mix than usual to allow the effect to pool easy in the areas where water would naturally get trapped, to build up a gradient of rust. In any areas I felt could do with more, I simply went back with a 50-50 mix on those desired areas. After the rust had cured, I picked out the nipple areas and the eyes with thin 75-25 paint to water scale 75 metal alchemy peridot alchemy, that color gold blending well with the rest of the aesthetic of the Sin Eater. I wasn't fully satisfied with the corpse at this stage, so went back with some neat stale Caribou Crimson wash over some areas of the recesses and the guts to get some more separation in the detail, as well as staining up the stumps of the arms, the neck and the legs. I also used some Vallejo Express Rotten Flesh to tint some of the intestines a sickly green, which then got a highlight of dead flesh, and fired some Vallejo Game Air Pale Flesh, thin 50-50 paint to water on some of the leading areas of flesh to make them really stand out. Next I used some Villainy Inks Goon's Grime, a dirty brown enamel wash that was thin 50-50 enamel to white spirit. That got applied all over the metalwork to stain it a little bit more and build up some particulates in the recesses. The mouth was the last area unpainted, so to start with, the flesh and the teeth got the deck tan treatment. With the deck tan drying, I used Blood for the Blood God on the hammerhead, knuckles and around the lower mouth areas to give an old dried blood effect. The interior of the mouth also got a careful coat to stain the gums that deep arterial red. I used some skeleton horde on the teeth before giving them a coat of 2 thin coats ivory tusk to pick out the tips and finish off the paintwork. When it comes to the base, you know by now I use AK Terrain Muddy Ground all over the base. And once that had cured and had a coat of Army Painter matte varnish, I moved on to my fetid water look with some AK Diorama Swamp Water to begin with. I took some AK Splatter Effects Dry Mud and dry brushed it onto the lower part of the cloth and onto the feet as well, just to give that nice dusty look to it. Final touch was some Dirty Down Gore. This got applied to the hammerhead and the knuckles to give a proper, disgusting, fresh blood look. With the swamp water and the gore drying, I gave the rim of the base the Citadel Abaddon Black treatment before finishing off the water with AK puddles before the swamp water finished curing mixed into the top. With the base now complete, the Sin Eater was finished. As much as I enjoyed pushing myself with the flesh work on the rest of the Black Grail, it was nice to get a really good crack at the armour and to really experiment with differing silver tones to build up shadows and highlights. I hope you all enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed painting up the Sin Eater. And if you did, then please do all the usual things like, comment, share, follow the socials and subscribe. And if you don't want to miss a video, then hit the notification bell. And until next time, I'll see you in the trenches.